25 minutes before 11 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. Did you ever hear that the buildings, the tall skyscrapers like in New York and Chicago, would not be possible if it weren't for elevators? The elevator is actually the reason we have tall buildings.
Yes, that's what I have heard. This is great.
Think about it. It's probably true. So that's a part of technology that influenced real estate a whole lot, right? Mm-hmm. Well, now you can go on your phone, for example, and you can book what do you call that thing, Airbnb or something like that, right? And that's kind of in innovating real estate as well. It's especially for the entrepreneur, the person who wants to make a little money selling and buying real estate, right? Mm-hmm. It's all part of the same picture. Dror Poleg is on the phone. He's a researcher on the impact of technology on urban life. He's an advisor to real estate executives. He's a consultant to the National Multifamily Housing Council. He's a breather? Is that the next thing on the list?
He's also a consultant to breather.
A consultant to breather. Okay, because I'm a breather. Just so you know.
I know, and you don't turn blue very often, so I think you're doing a good job.
Dror has written a book called Rethinking Real Estate, a roadmap to technology's impact on the world's largest asset class, and I found it on Amazon, so let's find out what the book is about and who it's for and how it can help us. Dror Poleg, good morning, sir. It's an honor to have you on the show.
Good morning, Larry and Robin, and thank you for this beautiful introduction.
Oh, you're welcome. I always look for something I have in common with my guests, and I am a breather, just so you know.
So Breather, just to be clear, is actually a flexible office provider based mostly out of New York, but originally from Canada and actually active all over the world. And they're kind of a WeWork competitor.
Is that right?
Up to a point, so very relevant these days.
Are you in New York right now?
I guess I'm in Brooklyn. I'm actually at a WeWork office near my home because we just had a baby, so I took a temporary office to be close to the home instead of going to the city every day.
And I love.
Congratulations!
I love the whole WeWork concept. I love that whole concept. Is it going to last though? Is it going to be around for a while?
I think it's definitely going to last. Obviously, it remains to be seen who will be the winners, and we've already seen some of the losers. At least some temporary losers. Yeah. But I think the transformation of the office market and of office space is ongoing and inevitable.
Yeah, there was a story this morning about Newman. Newman, I can't remember the guy's first name, but I guess he started
Adam Newman, yeah.
Yeah, he got like $1 billion or something, right?
Yeah, even more. I think 7 billion, but it's a little, there's the devil's in the details. Some of it is, he owns shares in the company, so he just sold them to people who wanted to buy them. And I think some of it is kind of 500 million pay for a loan that he took against shares in the company. Mm-hmm. So I don't know, in the end you'll have a few $100 million, which is not too bad, I guess, for a few years of hard work.
Yeah.
So tell me about the book Rethinking Real Estate. Does it help would you have to be in a big urban area like New York, or could the small town that we're in right now benefit from the new ways that real estate is bought, sold, and even rented?
I think the book is relevant for anyone who's interested in real estate. So starting from, very kind of serious large company professionals, large investment firms and office landlords and retail landlords and multifamily landlords. But it's definitely relevant for anyone else who touches real estate in their work, whether they're architects or planners or interior designers or technologists or entrepreneurs or bankers, and even just people that are flipping houses and are interested in, what the kind of so-called smart money is on about, and what the kind of the owners of the large real estate firms are thinking about and trying to do today that might be relevant elsewhere tomorrow. And there are significant parts of the book that are about the residential market, single-family housing market. So there's something for everyone, but definitely, it's not a Donald Trump real estate book on how to become a millionaire tomorrow. Mm-hmm. It's more a book, for people who want to dive into the topic.
Well, you are also a researcher because you bring parts of history within the pages of your book also from real estate.
Indeed. Mm-hmm. So I spent over a decade really doing real estate development all over the world, building very large projects. And I've always been interested in a lot of other aspects of people's lives within buildings and the history and even the anthropology of it. And the book was, in a way, an excuse to me to dive into all sorts of things that I'm interested in. So it looks at not just the future of, retail and office and houses and warehouses, but really why are these things as they are today? How are they shaped by technology so far? And I think Larry started with the elevator example, which is a great one. There's a lot of things that we take for granted when we look around, and actually even not so long ago, 100 or 150 years ago, many of these things were very different, and they're very likely to be very different, in 30 years or in 50 years. Down to very things that are hard to imagine, like the fact that, let's say, New York City didn't have proper apartment buildings 150 years ago, which is hard to imagine. But it only had tenement houses, which were converted single-family houses of very, very large, rich families that people converted into apartment buildings, into makeshift apartment buildings, or they had hotels where a lot of wealthy people would stay indefinitely sometimes. But no one built proper apartment buildings for people to share over the long term. And a lot of what we currently see people saying about even things like co-working and co-living were actually things that people used to say about normal apartment buildings 150 years ago. So the idea that you would share a corridor or a staircase or an entrance to a building with someone seems like very unpleasant and very radical for people in the 19th century.
I love, by the way, some of the apartments in I like the idea that the apartments are for rent or for sale. I like the idea you can buy an apartment in a lot of cities. I don't know if you can in this city, but in New York, I know you can. Talk about Airbnb a little bit. Do you know why I like Airbnb? I mean, as a customer, I like the idea that you can immerse yourself in a town instead of, the hotel experience is nice, but you don't really feel like you're part of the town. And Airbnb, you can live right in town, and you walk out the door, you go get a cup of coffee, and it feels like you live there. It's kind of a way to experience a city that, you know how it is, you go to a hotel, you don't really feel like you experienced the city.
Yeah. Airbnb is a wonderful example of how technology can really unlock assets that were there and that were unused or underused, and suddenly make them available to millions of new people that can access a room in a new city at a price that is lower than a hotel, and as you pointed out, also have a more authentic or genuine experience. Feel like they're part of the local community and that they're really experiencing a home and not just like a cookie cutter hotel room that would look the same in every city. But that, of course, comes with some downsides that I think the company is now dealing with. First and foremost, just regulation. Whether it's legal and what the neighbors think about it. But also in the experience itself, that the element of surprise could be very pleasant, but also sometimes can be very unpleasant. So, the fact that you don't always know what you're getting is starting to become an issue. I think as the company is trying to scale and become more business-like and to really capture not just people who are looking to save and travel every now and then, but people who are frequent travelers and need to have some level of standards and some level of certainty. So that's a challenge for them. But I think the biggest challenge for them is actually just from competition. So I think home sharing is definitely not going away. It's like the office sharing. But I think now a lot of the other firms, like Booking.com or Expedia and even Marriott and the large hotel chains are going into home sharing or buying Airbnb competitors and are starting to sometimes list the same property on their website. And I think Airbnb is starting to feel the heat from that. I think their IPO next year will be very interesting as well, just like the WeWork one was over the past few weeks.
You also have to be aware of the zoning laws, because when you're going into business, like the WeWork spaces and things like that, the person that's being entrepreneurial has to also investigate that end of the world.
Definitely, and in the office world, it's actually a little easier because buildings that is zoned commercial, many things are allowed within that use. But in the residential world, it's much more strict, and definitely often home sharing or Airbnb is in violation of the letter of the law. And many cities and municipalities are still grappling with how to deal with that. And like part of the book also talks about the idea of zoning. So traditionally, someone who is a real estate entrepreneur buys a piece of land and is making a significant investment, looking for a longer-term return, like looking to generate income from the property, so which requires very long-term planning. And zoning laws are in place to help with that long-term planning. So when I buy a piece of land, I need to make a few assumptions about what kind of competition is allowed or not allowed around my property. And technology is also undermining the power of zoning to really regulate that. And Airbnb is a prime example. So somebody who opened a hotel a few blocks from an Airbnb thinking that nobody will build a hotel there for the next 20 years because it's not allowed, you're suddenly seeing hundreds of rooms or thousands of rooms coming online in properties that were not supposed to be used that way. Now, I'm not necessarily against that. I'm just pointing out how it makes real estate itself much more dynamic and kind of keeping owners and operators on their toes in ways that didn't exist even 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
So, one of the things I do remember from when I was a kid, just so you know, I'm not young, I'm 64, and I grew up in the New York area, and I remember rooms to let as opposed to rooms for rent. And the way I understood it, I never did it, but the way I understood it was if you needed a room for a day, as opposed to as opposed to spending the dollar amount of a hotel, you just let a room, or they let you stay in a room, is what it was, in exchange for money or even for work, which probably is unheard of today. So is the real big difference the fact that we can arrange these things on our phones as opposed to knocking on the door?
So there's a couple of differences. One, in New York City at least, and I think in several other cities, it's actually illegal to rent apartments by the bedroom. It's also illegal under a different law to rent apartments for less than 30 days. Because then it becomes a hotel, it's taxed differently, it's regulated differently. But in New York, you're actually not allowed to lease somebody a room or to put a key on the door. You're only allowed to lease an apartment to a group of people, which is part of the difficulty today for young people that have to share apartments.
So that's different from when I was a kid.
Oh, okay.
Like if I have to share an apartment with 3 people, I actually have to sign the lease first and then find the other 3 people, or try to coordinate all of them to arrive on the same day to sign the lease. Now, if we're all friends, it's easy, but if we're not, it's very, very difficult for someone who just moved to the city to find 4 other people or 3 other people, vet each one of them financially, and then line all of them up to the same day of signing the lease, collect the deposit from each of them, and sign one lease together. Which is why other companies are emerging to facilitate that, the co-living companies that they're facilitating sharing. But back to your question, I think it's, in a way, there's nothing new about people sharing, hosting people overnight, but obviously technology facilitates that at a volume that is unprecedented. If in the past, in order to find that room and find that person and trust each other and transfer money to each other, the transaction costs were so high that this wouldn't happen too frequently, or it would happen a few hundred times a night in a place like New York. Now with the internet, lowering the transaction costs, meaning the cost of people finding each other, trusting each other, so reading reviews about each other, transferring money to each other with a third party in the middle, acting as some sort of an escrow, it all becomes so simple that it starts to happen tens of thousands a night or hundreds of thousands of times a night in a place like New York. So the impact is very different, even if the activity itself has always been there. And I think the same is true for a lot of these innovations. I mean, people were sharing offices before WeWork, people were sharing apartments before co-living or Airbnb, but also people were calling black cars before Uber, but streamlining it with technology really turns it into something that is very impactful, and suddenly everyone is aware of it.
Have these innovations affected the insurance industry at all? Are there different insurances for different type of ventures?
That's a very interesting question. It's something that I touch on very, very lightly in the book, but I think there's a lot of second order consequences to what is happening in real estate, and part of it is for insurance, both as insurers, so when they come to insure a property and they need to think of how it will be used, there's a lot of surprising new things that they need to take into account today. The other side of that, to me, is even more interesting. So the insurance companies and pension funds are some of the largest investors in real estate, whether it is in commercial real estate assets, but even in single-family houses, their mortgages are often stacked together into commercial mortgage-backed securities that these insurance and pension funds buy into. And they buy into them because they expect them to behave in a certain way and to generate some sort of regular income. But once real estate is becoming more dynamic and less predictable, it makes it very difficult for these type of investors to get the regular returns that they've been used to so far. And when they go out and give a loan to a property, it's becoming harder for them to predict what the income will be every year. And the income might be higher than ever before because some of these things like Airbnb and WeWork means that the property is being used more than ever before and generates more income, but that income is much more variable. Just like the income of a hotel is very different from the income of an office building. So the office building gets the same rent every year, for 15 years, sometimes guaranteed in advance, but a hotel, every night or every week, the income changes and it's much more cyclical.
Right.
So it might make more money per square foot, but it's much harder to predict, and that's a problem for insurance companies and for pension funds and other large financial institutions.
You mentioned earlier about rating a place that you might stay in, and I like the idea in today's world with today's technology that it used to be that if you wanted to rent a place, you had to be the one who passed all the tests. The landlord.
Right.
The landlord didn't have to pass any tests. But now, if I go to rent a place, I can look online and look at Yelp, for example, and say, this landlord screwed me out of money. This landlord wouldn't fix the heat, right? So the landlord has to live up to certain standards, too, because that person gets rated just as much as the customer does, as the renter.
Absolutely, and that also touches on your previous question of what difference did technology make. I mean, obviously people could badmouth or share rumors with each other previously, but today there's actually listing sites, especially in large cities like New York, where you can find all the information about different violations and bed bugs and leaks and whatever about specific apartments, and even whether there's noise from construction nearby, and whether there's airplanes going above it, and whether there's a subway line underneath.
Right.
That makes things.
Right.
So all of that is suddenly available at scale to people, so it definitely changes the game for landlords.
And there's another part of this, too, is that a lot of times the people New York attracts a lot of people from elsewhere, and so does Paris, and so does LA, and a lot of cities. You got the guy in Kansas or in Milwaukee that just can't wait to get to a bigger city, and they don't have the advantage of asking their friends, "What do you think of this place?" So that I think that your phone, the opportunity to just look at something on your phone and say, "Oh my gosh, this place has 1 star," that's going to give you won't go there. That place won't get your business.
Yeah, I think that's the good thing. It's also there's something a little sad about it. So I think in a way, technology now facilitates much more interaction between people. To each other.
That's true.
In order to do things for one another and to share things. I think the kind of somewhat melancholy thing about it is that we don't really know how to trust it. Anything that used to be just a favor from a neighbor or doing something for someone or helping out or, can you look after my luggage for 2 hours because I have to go somewhere, or do you know anyone who would take my apartment, or can I catch a ride with you? All of these things that for free are now becoming transactions, and they're all and I think that creates a new opportunity because people are starting to feel a yearning towards these connections that they've lost, which drives this whole need for community, for coming together in new ways, which also WeWork tried to tap into in its own way, that the office itself becomes a place where people socialize and meet new people because they just have no way of doing that anywhere else anymore.
Well, your writings are very, very genuine, and you also intersperse humor throughout your book, so it is not a textbook.
I think so, yeah. I try I enjoyed writing it very much, so I hope that it will mostly be enjoyable to read. I think some parts are, a little technical, but I think most of it is, I try to kind of keep it in narrative form.
Dror, I wanted to ask you, is the book coming out in December, like it's not out yet?
So the Amazon says December. It's probably actually going to be available, start shipping in November.
Okay.
It's now in production. I think the Kindle version will actually be ready as soon as next week.
Okay.
And will already be on Amazon, and the print version is already available for pre-order. And it will ship once it's ready, probably middle of November or so. So people can buy it already, and as a gift for the holidays, maybe for their employees and their relatives, or just for themselves.
Rethinking Real Estate is the name of the book, a roadmap to technology's impact on the world's largest asset class. Dror Poleg is the author and our guest. Before we say goodbye, real quickly, would I recommend this to a real estate professional as well as the person like myself who probably is just going to rent an Airbnb every now and then?
Yeah, I think a real estate professional and anyone who is interested, I think, in business and finance in general, there's something in there for them. Because, I mean, real estate touches it's the foundation of almost any business and any financial product. So anyone who's curious would enjoy it.
Would it give advice to the person who's thinking of turning a room or two of their home into an Airbnb?
But it would give much more besides. So I think if you only have a very specific question, probably there's something on the internet that provides a better answer.
Gotcha.
If you want a deeper understanding of it, then the book is for you.
Okay, got it. Dror, thank you for taking time to be with us today, and congratulations again on being a new daddy.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Thank you very much.
That's the best part, right?
I enjoyed speaking with you.
All right,
It is. It's amazing.
We'll be right back.
Hey, if you're wanting some color for your yard, then check the big colorful ad in the paper or go to Bob Wine's CameliaGardens.net because Bob has colorful deals that'll knock your eyes out. How about Bob's own heritage brand of top quality camellias? They're budding like crazy and they'll be blooming soon. What's more, they're still priced at a super low $19.99. Bob has great citrus trees this year, the big number 5 size, with many bearing fruit right now